Very good afternoon to all of you. The title of my presentation today is Restoration and Reuse, Case Studies in Singapore and Yangon. This is the flow of my talk. I would first look at some case studies, especially in Singapore and Yangon. Starting off with the heritage conservation framework. Like Kelvin says, we have been quite fortunate to be able to carry out or get involved in overseas conservation projects in recent years. And it has been, besides being a steep learning curve, mostly, I would say, like Mr. Rappeland says, dealing with a lot of the human issues involved in conservation projects. We find that it's useful to look at the two places and learn, besides comparing the two, learn lessons from them. So each experience can mutually benefit one another. Just to give a brief introduction to our work, we are not, I would say, a conventional architecture firm per se, but we are actually a specialist consultant advising just on heritage conservation. So we get involved in different stages of a project, from concept to construction and completion, right up to completion. So we produce different studies. Mainly our forte is in research, historical research, assessment of the building's condition, and making recommendations on how to restore the buildings. Now, over time, we have distilled a set of conservation principles. These are 5 most important ones. One, preserving the layers of history. This is in recognition that every building has layers of history to it, and it will be too reductivist to just go back to a single point in time. Second, dialogue between old and new. Of course, new additions. We don't believe in replicas, in artificial history. So we always think that the historical and the new must have a meaningful dialogue. Third is in not cases where we can't preserve the building or preserve the elements in its original place, we always encourage the reuse and upcycling of these materials, because a lot of these materials are historical materials. They have historical value, and especially material value. To just give an example, a lot of the timbers we encounter in our projects actually fell from processed from large mature trees, unlike the timbers we get today, which will warp and split in no time. Fourth is a good practice to have the principle of compatibility and reversibility. So this is just not just in terms of design of the new, but also in terms of the new materials that you use that shouldn't cause any damage to the old. And finally, we always advocate customized solutions, because working with a team of consultants, everybody has their own take, agenda, and own goals. We always say there's no standard solution to conservation project and how to upgrade a building. Let's work for the building and not against it. And some of these principles are actually informed by heritage charters. I won't go into details. Important ones that we subscribe to is the Australia Burra Charter, where we think that conservation is based on respect for existing fabric, use associations and meanings. And especially the following sentence, a cautious approach of changing as much as necessary but as little as possible. Of course, easier said than done in projects, but we try in the different undertaking. Now, let's just start off from our experience in some couple of projects in Singapore. I wouldn't try to be a spokesman for URA. There's no need for that. But from our understanding, the diverse categories of conservation in Singapore, you have the national monument, the central historic districts, the bungalows, the secondary settlements, and there is an increasing level of controls and regulations. Why I wanted to start off with heritage conservation framework is because I believe this is very essential infrastructure for any consultant working in heritage conservation has to acknowledge and also work with, and in some cases when there's need be a challenge. Yeah. And it is something totally essential, without which it's a totally different ball game altogether. Now, the first project I will use to illustrate Singapore's model of conservation is the Beach Road development, or commercially known as South Beach, which falls somewhere between categories 2 and 3 while interpreting the conservation guidelines set out in the sales of sites document. Now, this is very prominently located. It's along Beach Road, just right opposite Raffles Hotel. You can see this is Raffles Hotel. It's Beach Road. It's a corner between Beach Road and Bras Basah Road. Involve adaptive reuse and redevelopment of a former military site. The 4 buildings fronting Beach Road. This belongs to the former Beach Road camp, which was the birthplace of Singapore Armed Forces. And this corner building predates Singapore Armed Forces. This is the former Britannia Cup built for the Air Force and Air, Sea and Land Forces of the British. So this is a very significant project because there's no other types like this before this came along, because we are not talking about a single building, we are talking about a complex of buildings, and they all belong to different eras and even different owners once upon a time. And what's more important, these are not bespoke pieces of architecture. These are not your grand palaces or your temples or your monuments. These are actually, I would classify them as military industrial types of building, and conserved mainly to preserve the, I believe, the urban streetscape along Beach Road, and also to honor the social memories of people passing through this place, especially the national servicemen of Singapore. So the main regulatory documents covering this site was this 3, and you can see, I won't go into details, this shows that Singapore probably has the most well-established and stringent set of controls in terms of what you can or cannot do with building, heritage, historical buildings, okay, at least on paper, right? This is an example of a control plan, which is by now quite developed. In fact, not many, I would say, Southeast Asian countries have these kinds of documents that seeks to safeguard the heritage features of the old buildings. There are some the guidelines that describe what can or cannot be done, identifying parts of buildings that should be kept, should be reconstructed if it's missing, so on and so forth. And in the case of the former Britannia Club, when we got involved in the project, it looked like this, right? And what happened was, from old photographs, you can see that this is actually a modernist building, and what appears to be fair-faced brick. And look how far it has come, year 2003, when the building was vacated. And what happened was, I guess there's some kind of anxiety about looking not grand enough opposite Raffles Hotel, so the owners decided to add a lot of fake classical columns, pediments, and basically whitewash the whole building and plaster over the brick. So the first question everybody asks is, can we ever achieve this original appearance? How difficult is it to remove without destroying? If the original finishes are still beneath, how to not destroy that? So happily enough, we have managed to restore it, and we averted the second I would say option of having to reconstruct most of this. Okay, primarily through a long series of tests using different materials to scrape off the paint. A very thick waterproofing paint used for swimming pools were used to waterproof the buildings. I mean, best intention by the owners, but this was really tough to remove. And on the facades, these columns were found to be just empty shells. They were bolted onto the facade, and we were able to uncover the beautiful travertine marble underneath. So the guidelines specify that we need to restore and reinstate, so we did exactly just that. But there is also not so clear, I mean, not so apparent to most, is there is a degree of flexibility in the guidelines as well, where it merits consideration. Developers and consultants can propose modification that deviate from the guidelines. For example, in this control plan, it shows this has to be reinstated. But when we look at the current building, it has already been modified beyond recognition. The windows are no longer there. And therefore, because this is a commercial mixed-use redevelopment, the site, the developer feels that it will benefit from more, what we call that, extensive glazing that allow people to view what's inside, what's happening inside the building. So contemporary insertion, new windows that reach to the ground floor is added. And in a language that is similar, it's not totally 100% replica, similar, and does not look out of character with the original building. Now, one of the challenges of this project was actually in trying to turn a very inward-looking and very defensive kind of site configuration. Remember, it used to be a military camp, so we meant to keep everybody out. But now you want to say, come in and do your shopping and eat, dine at the restaurants and things like that. So how does one achieve that? Yeah. We believe in taking a balanced approach. We don't, again, we say we don't subscribe that. This is not a museum project. This is not a preservation project. So there is some kind of inevitability in change. But I think how what's to be done is how sensitively this process of change is managed. Now, this is another building in South Beach project. This is the Drill Hall, one of the more iconic buildings among the four. This is the original photograph, what it looked like when it was finished in 1930s. And through time, it has been modified. A lot of the windows were no longer the same. A lot of the, even the facade, it was painted very thickly and things like that. But of course, we managed to restore the appearance, but there was also new intervention. There was an annex building behind that was allowed to be demolished in the guidelines. And because the master plan is premised upon creating a new covered promenade in the middle of the site. So an important thing is to add a new entrance to this drill hall. Okay, this is facing Beach Road, this is facing the promenade. And what form and shape should this new entrance take became a subject of many months of debate, not just amongst the team, but also with the authorities. And the final outcome met the requirements of all parties. This is a glass volume. Its massing and form respects the massing, I suppose, of the historic building. It's totally contemporary. Its scale, its material use, it's a 21st century addition, and it's quite clear about that. And it does not overwhelm the building. Internally, there was also pressure to increase the amount of usable floor space because this is now the hotel banquet hall. In the past, the use was indoors ceremonial hall for the troops. It's called a drill hall, but they do very little drills inside the building, actually. They have more of their dinner and dance events there. This is what it looked like before development. And again, the issue of space, additional space, crop up, and after a long process of exploration, a new mezzanine was added to the part that extends from the glass volume that you just saw. And this new mezzanine actually contains the extra floor space without adding anything onto the exterior of the buildings. Okay, and the mezzanine floor is also set back from the arches, so it doesn't touch the interiors. Now, speaking of interiors, okay, this is another project that I will talk about. This is actually in many ways quite a groundbreaking project, conservation project in Singapore. In terms of floor area, there are 3 historical buildings on a very compact urban site, and this is the new development that's allowed to be built. This has street fronting, 2 street fronting block, and an existing theatre. This is Singapore's only remaining 1930s theatre done in the Art Deco style. This project is important because of 2 main things. One is it's the first project that actually, for us, I mean, that has very specific guidelines to conserve the interior of the theatre. Yeah. And this is, I'm sure most of us know that to date, the conservation guidelines are very much privileged the exterior facade, the appearance, because it is viewed more of a urban conservation viewpoint, where streetscapes, neighborhood character, and these things are more important, and the interior are allowed to be changed with different degrees of flexibility. So this, somehow or other, because of its great social and also, I would say, historical and some cultural significance, the interiors were meant to be conserved as well. Second important thing about this project, I think, is the consideration of social memories. Again, the theatre is actually a very popular place where many Singaporeans and visitors have fond memories of, and therefore the theatre was taken as a holistic element, and not in the conservation guidelines there wasn't a requirement to go back to 1930 at all. In fact, it preserved elements that dates later, but holds social memories for the people. So these are some before and after pictures of how the theatre looked when we got involved in the project. These are actually acoustic panels. A lot of the original decoration, we found this quite a stunning photograph of what it looked like in 1930. And it's quite a far cry. Yeah? And so everybody was quite curious what lies beneath the cladding. So happily, when the cladding were removed, we found traces of the old ornamentation still intact. But of course, the happiness turned to a bit of a shock because we found that actually they were deliberately damaged because in the process of putting up this cladding, they were chipped away, flattened, leveled. So we're left with an interior that looked like it just went through a blast, right? And it is something quite sobering. It's a sobering process to be studying the condition of damage and all that. But after a long process, I think of 2.5 years, finally the theatre has reopened just last year, in May last year, to commemorate Singapore's 50 years of independence. Now, I just mentioned this is significant because the guidelines actually stipulated that interior should be kept. And I think it is quite important because in the old photograph, it doesn't really suggest that interiors are intact at all, but I think this provision is very important. It says the existing covering from the 80s shall be removed to recover any features underneath. So at the point where the developer comes in, he is actually not it's not 100% sure whether or not he needs to restore, or there's anything left to restore. So there was, I suppose, a series of debates on what to do if we find something, and it moved happily. It moved to a good direction. Oh. Okay, I also mentioned memories. What I'm talking about is actually these two Pegasus, this winged horse. Although they look like sculpture, but actually on close view, they're actually bas relief. These are plaster of Paris. It's a wonder that they lasted decades because the construction was really quite flimsy. The workmanship was quite remarkable, but considering what kind of material, very simple material was built in. But it was actually in the guidelines, but through our research, we found that these features were actually added later. In fact, they date to the 60s and 70s. Another feature is the dome with the zodiac sign, or rather the outline of the zodiac. Both features we found were not part of the 1930s scheme. Yeah. But I think most people who goes to this theater remember the dome with the zodiac and the horses, the winged horses and chariots. And for this reason, it's an important milestone in the preparation of conservation requirements to take into account that latter day additions with social significance should be kept. So one of the important things after we discovered the interiors were relatively intact was to really try to see how much of it can be preserved or recovered. There needs to be a very long, detailed process of mapping out all the damages. We don't have the luxury of time to do this for many of our projects, but in this case, it was quite special because without knowing what can be restored and what needs to be replicated, there's no way to move forward with a clear direction. And through learning about what is intact and what is not, and through actually studying the different ornaments, we actually learn a lot from the building. This theater was built by the French contractors of firm of Brossard Mopan. They're pioneers in concrete construction in this part of the world, Singapore and Malaya, and they had very brilliant engineers in the team. I guess it's almost equivalent to what you get in the design and build today. They were quite heavily involved in detailing the ornaments, and we found certain things that surprised us. A lot of these are precast concrete, so you have a building that captured the history, a very early use of precast technology in Singapore. It's quite remarkable. And some of these precast units were first installed and became the formwork for the permanent structure. So there's a kind of structural acrobatics going on in terms of the design. One of the main challenges was to reinstate the lost features in the building. If I go back one slide, a lot of the features, I would say 60% of the high key features were lost. When, for example, this ornament, only one set was found. For whatever reason, one set of ornament out of 14. Okay, this is the only one that is intact. And therefore, we took the opportunity to make very accurate documentation. This is a handheld light scanner, and the data from the scan is input into the software, and in the laboratory, a reverse mold is made. And the old reed bunch ornament, each of them weigh about 200 kilos. There's no way we're going to do a 200 kilogram concrete and put it back on the wall that is 80 years old. And keeping in mind the requirements to meet current day building safety codes. So again, there was some innovation in terms of the substitute material. This is very lightweight glass reinforced concrete, gypsum, glass reinforced gypsum. And this is much lighter. It's actually hollow inside, and the detailing was slightly changed for able to mount it onto the walls. Other features that were lost was the ceiling moldings. As can be seen, this could be seen in the photograph, in 1930 photograph. What we found, the project team entered the site was only the ornamented parts were intact, and the rest of it were just covered over by acoustic panels. So even the zodiac itself was painted on acoustic panels and not actually on the structure itself. So there was intent to reconstruct the missing parts of the ceiling decoration over here. Okay, that's the majority. But we only have old photographs to work with, and it's became quite a challenge because we have to, there's only so much you can go in guessing based on photographic images without any drawings. So it's only until one fine day where during one of the site inspection, I spotted that on a piece of plaster that fell down, there seemed to be some lines that were quite intentional looking. And we asked the contractor to scrape away the other area of plaster, and then we found what we believe to be traces of the original cornices on the ceiling motif, right? And this is a drawing of that, and we correlated this with the photograph, and it just so happened that we found one piece here, a flat piece, one curved piece here, and another curved piece here. So based on this template, we are able to further extrapolate and develop the design of the new moldings. Now this theatre, actually one of the biggest challenges is not so much reinstating the features. That's a conservation challenge, but the adaptive reuse challenge was to make this a multi-purpose venue. In the past, it was designed as a cinema, it was designed as a live show theatre, so reverberation is very important. Therefore, a lot of the ornamentation does that. It enhances reverberation. But in this 21st century incarnation, it needs to be both a cinema and a theatre, and also a banquet hall, right? Of course, this again is partly commercially driven, but partly, is basically the need of the what is the sound business plan to make this a sustainable, I would say, a building that will not fall into obsolescence quickly. So, because of this, there are very conflicting acoustic requirements. For cinema, you need a very dry acoustics. Okay, so you can have your Dolby surround and all that. But for live performance, you have to have the reverberation. And then, of course, for banquet, you can't have very noisy acoustics. And the floor actually has to have a degree of flexibility in terms of how tables can be arranged. Okay, so one of the opportunities that came to the team when it was decided to reinstate these moldings was to actually have the new acoustic lining. Okay, these new moldings will be made with entirely new material that will achieve the acoustic requirements. So they are actually not just plain plaster molding, but they are actually acoustic materials, acoustic panels that are sandwiched in layers. And this shows the process of restoration work to the ceiling. Okay, this yellow material is the new acoustic panels, as well as this white material. And of course, the original reed bunch ornaments on the ceiling were carefully repaired and restored. And through the course of our research on the building, we found that gilding was used quite a fair bit on the ceiling. So it was not a boring white interior, but it was filled with accents that were highlighted in gold. So this was again reinstated. Now this, one of the more interesting aspects of the recovery of lost features was the mosaic, the zodiac. Okay, this is the original, or rather existing condition. We found that these are actually just outline tracing painted on acoustic panels, and the internal features of the zodiac were mostly gone, and nobody knows what they look like except in text description, and also guessing from the exterior form. So the team decided that it will be reinstated, it will be put back when the new acoustic ceiling goes up, but it will not be the plain outline, but it will be done in a style that is complementary to the Art Deco character. Now, I know there has been some controversy surrounding this reinstatement work, or rather this reinterpretation of the heritage elements. And quite unfairly, the arrow was pointed to the fact that they got an amateur artist to restore it or to paint it. But I think what is not largely known to the public is this iteration that you see if you visit the theatre today is after several months of work, and there were at least 8 different versions that went around for each scheme. And only after this scheme has been shown, has been agreed upon by all parties, the owner, the consultants, even the authorities, the final design was approved and the repainting of the zodiac went ahead. So one of the criteria was the zodiac must not be realistic. It needs to look, it needs to be basically be in complementary to the Art Deco character of the theatre. Yeah. So a very a simple three-tone stylized painting style, okay, was adopted for the zodiac. But the outline actually followed exactly the same as the original. Okay, this is a before and after photograph of the features of the ceiling that has been restored. And even the old ceiling fans, we found that they're actually quite rare intact examples of ceiling fans that were manufactured in India back in the 1930s. So these are actually restored to working condition. Yeah. In the days where there's no air conditioning, these are the main way where the audience can feel cool in the theatre. Now, I will now talk about a project in Yangon. This is still under design stage. What we learned, like I said, is not just about the differences or the challenges in the technical aspects of restoration, but one of the things that were quite starkly different from Singapore is the legislative framework for conservation. Okay, there is it's a very rapidly evolving landscape. Okay, from the time when we came on board, there's nothing, no controls at all on the building. To 2 years down the road, there were more and more controls on the building. So you can imagine this kind of process can set back the design of the project by quite a fair bit of time, because you have to meet the new requirements that come out on the fly. They have 2 main preservation laws, the Cultural Heritage Region Law and the YCDC Heritage List. Now, this list actually is a very important list that contains 180 plus buildings. They are not covered by the Preservation of Cultural Heritage Law. Why is this so? Most of the buildings here actually only cover religious monuments like the Buddhist monasteries and temples and stupas and other religious sites. For the rest, or vast majority of Yangon, which comprise a very rich, diverse colonial heritage, these are not protected. So this list was supposed to do that, supposed to protect the rest of it, but it's still actually quite limited, because they have much more than built heritage than the 180 plus building, but it's a starting point. And what's more troubling for us, there's no guidelines, right? And each time a former government building is vacated and up for redevelopment, they are actually they're just on the list, and it says it's a listed building, but there are no guidelines to say what you can or cannot do on the building. Now, the body that oversees heritage is Yangon Heritage Trust, YHT. It's an NGO that advises the City Council, YCDC, and he has no statutory powers to gazette or enforce conservation. But where its influence comes from is the intimate ties of the chairman with the political, bureaucratic, and business leadership. So everything kind of leans on Dr. Tan Min Woo's connections with the political leadership and business community. And there are actually, things are moving quite fast. I said there are future changes. There's going to be a downtown conservation zone that's going to be set up, urban conservation law that is being reviewed in Parliament. And more recently, there's going to be a national building code after so many decades of stagnation that includes a chapter on heritage and existing buildings. So in certain ways, it's moving slowly. I mean, it's moving rapidly. In certain ways, it might become quite a different place in a couple of years' time. So the project I'm going to talk about is the former Burma Railways building. And because it has no official regulations, and there is a very, basically a very regulatory framework that is changing, we had to do much more studies and reports on the building itself. Not just the site, but not just the building, but the surrounding. Just to give you an example, we had to do a very comprehensive documentation of the building, very detailed survey of the condition. We were asked to produce a heritage impact assessment and also produce a conservation management plan. Now, all these reports are actually in the order in which they are produced. So this started in 2013 and this is 2016. Okay, so you can see this how rapidly the project evolved according to the environment. So just to give some background and context, this is the building in question. Of course, this is a view of the building in 1920s. The building, earliest phase of building is in 1877. It's a 3-story building. Currently, it's in a U-shaped building. It's a courtyard. And this is the nerve center of Myanmar's railway. That means it's not the railway station per se, it's actually where the railway was designed and later on implemented and expanded from Myanmar to the Thai border and also to the Chinese border. So basically this is the railway. So that building has a lot of historical significance, especially to the development of the railway history. Now the challenge then, it's a totally closed-off government building. Of course, things got a bit more dicey during the years of the military junta. And the future use is actually a luxury hotel. Okay, this is the Peninsula, Yangon. Now, we actually got to, we found very little historical material, archival material. We actually did carry out research in UK, the India office, where we believe most of these records have held, but somehow or other, because this is a government office building, it's not a tourist attraction even in its past. Very few documents remain. So we had to do a very in-depth study of the building itself. And one of the things we can learn from the building is construction techniques and different types of articulation. And after spending quite a fair bit of time on site, we found that certain walls has features that resemble external facades. And based on this, we built up a hypothesis that although the building looked very uniform on the exterior, everything is in red brick and laterite stone, it's actually a building that grew with time. And this became a very important thing for us in terms of preparing the basis of its conservation principles. Okay. I won't go into detail, just suffice to say that it grew from a tiny building, an L-shaped building. Of course, very later on, with what little visual information we managed to gather, we managed to come up with the building chronology through time. And one of the most important era was when it was privatized from a state railway building to a private railway company. A lot of the more current day features were added, including these cast iron awnings that were shipped all the way from the firm of William McFarlane in Scotland. Yeah. So this was an important process because we had to come up with a conservation framework, or rather decide on or advise on the significance of different parts of the building, because it's going to become quite a different animal after it is transformed into a luxury hotel. Okay, this is what it looks like today. Okay. So the Architectural Heritage Survey is really a very detailed photo documentation, as well as listing down the different features of the building that gives it heritage character. Okay. We also went down to quite a detailed study on materials. Now, this building is one of its kind in Yangon. It's actually, the first story walls were built of a strange kind of rock called laterite. It's actually not so much a stone, then it's a very compacted soil-like material. But actually, it's quarried along the old river banks that interestingly mirrored the expansion of the railway. Okay? Of course, the railway and the river had a very intimate symbiotic relationship, because they were used to carry commodities from the interior of Burma to the port city of Rangoon. Okay, and we found that the materials were mostly used to construct foundations of buildings, but never used in facades, because it's not easy to work the material to produce detailing like this. And we also found in the later phases of the building windows that were manufactured in India in 1925. These are original catalogs that leads us to believe, help us to date the building. Internally, we also did quite a fair bit of documentation work. Okay, floorboards, ceilings, cornices. This is all because there is no documentation done officially of the building. And we felt that it's our duty and due diligence to understand the building as fully as possible before any work or any advanced design commences. These are some technical studies on the state of the building. Laboratory tests on material characteristics and how serviceable they are in the long run. Now, in the second year of the project, we were asked to prepare a heritage impact assessment report, because the building site, as you can see here, this is the site, is very near. It's actually one heritage building with new buildings that are planned for the rest of the sites. Pretty big site. And they are actually, this is next to the Bojong Ongsan Market, or the Scott Market heritage building, and St. Gabriel's Church. They both date back to 1920s. So as part of the due diligence process, the developer was asked to prepare, commission this impact assessment report, and where detailed studies, engineering studies, conservation studies were done, and the mitigation measures proposed. Okay. And not just on adjacent structures, but also on impact on the historical neighborhood. Now, this is the market that I just mentioned. There are actually a smattering of, this is the most busy thoroughfare. Actually, this is the CBD, the heart of the financial downtown. This is downtown Yangon. Bojong Onsan Road is the main artery. And this is the area where it will undergo the most development in the years to come. It will probably become almost unrecognizable in 5 to 10 years' time. In terms of the urban planning that is in place. So it was quite crucial for us to assess the impact of the new development on the historical neighborhood. And finally, to protect the building's long-term use and maintenance, we produced the conservation management plan. That's actually not done in Singapore so much. Okay. So the adoption of HIA and conservation management plan is actually a direct result of Yangon Heritage Trust working very closely with Australian heritage experts under the AUS-8 scheme. So Australia pledged funding, flying in experts to be resident in Yangon Heritage Trust for 2 to 3 years, and then they will train up the local capability to do that. So these documents are actually the first time, or rather, I would say it's the first time such documents are produced for heritage building in Yangon. Okay. One of the more interesting things we carried out was a series of oral history interview, because the conservation management plan process includes social significance. And again, this is not so much carried out in Singapore as yet, where the memories and the community's memories about the site were documented and preserved. Okay. We carry out oral history interviews, and the site became so much more livelier. For example, one thing that was quite captivating were, although the building was an office building, but actually there was a community living there. There was houses, there were squatters, there were all kinds of things. And one of the interesting things is there are stationary train carriages, because it is the railway administration building, that were diverted from the main line and parked there and turned into housing for the railway staff. Okay, this is the most important part, I feel, of the CMP, where it's a very rational process of turning development intent and how development intent impact on the space and heritage elements. And then there is an assessment of the level of significance and also the heritage impact if such development intent is carried out. So this helped the team to rationalize and come up with a more balanced approach when it decides what it wants to conserve and what it needs to make way for something new. Okay. And very clear policy with regards to how conservation work is to carry out. So you can imagine this took the place of what the URA restoration guidelines in Singapore, because this is actually after our studies on the building and understanding the history, how things are put together, the condition of the building, we had to spell out what is our approach to their conservation. Okay. And very importantly, very comprehensive documentation of elements was done. Now I come to the last part of my presentation. Although the two places are quite different and they all have different conservation framework and their strength and limitation, both places share a strong commercial pressure, basically in rapidly developing economies, especially compared to Europe. Yeah. And both also share that relatively little in-depth studies has been done. Okay, for most of the historical buildings, it's a situation that has been changing over the past few years, improving over the past few years. But in comparison to the West, it's still lacking. What's also common is the mismatched expectation and desires. How, when you decide, you look at a building, do you see it for what it is, or you already have an idea about what you want out of the building? Okay, a popular perception of heritage conservation is anti-progress and anti-development. Again, in Singapore, this is something that has been improving over the last 10 years. But in popularly, there's still a lack of public awareness of that. Okay? Now, what we found most interesting is this. There's a difference in cultural attitude toward colonial heritage. In Singapore, we have relatively little difficulty to accept this as part of our past. We will embrace it as part of our present-day identity. But in Myanmar, it's an unfinished and unresolved business. Okay, it's still viewed with ambivalence because of very different colonization history that they experience. But of course, everybody, people by and large agree that it's something that cannot be refuted. But this difference in thinking would actually tend to prejudice the perception of this heritage, and therefore the colonial built heritage is actually more threatened than the vernacular or the religious heritage structures. So to finish off, I will not go into details, but from our experience working on Singapore projects, we felt that the 3R principles could be implemented more decisively. for beginning to include significant interior spaces and features, because we look at a building and understand and appreciate a building in its totality, not just the facades. And I think Capitol Theatre is a good example of moving in such a direction. However, a lot of these interiors, not every building is publicly accessible, I suppose, and they have done A&A over time. So you need actually to do some investigation into the building before writing up the codes to preserve the building. So I would suggest that a government fund could be initiated to incentivize this research and fieldwork that could lead to recovery of such concealed heritage. Okay? And over time, this will help to also build out a solid database. And of course, regulatory framework documents such as HIA and Conservation Management Plan could be, the useful aspects of it could be adapted and introduced for adaptive reuse projects, especially important ones. Now for Yangon, we have tried to do systematic and detailed documentation, and it's very much appreciated by the government authorities. The HIA and the CMP, for us, are important documents because they don't just affect decision-making during design, but it's during the usage of the building after the people, the users move inside. And also it deal with the long-term maintenance of the building, so the building is in a good shape, using appropriate methods of maintenance. Now, combined together, this what we call an arsenal tool to support heritage conservation is very slow. I would say it's much slower than the winds of change and the developmentalist thinking in government, in private sector. So what remains to be seen is how, after the first few HIA and CMP are produced for heritage buildings in Yangon, how rigorously the authorities adopt it and enforce it. And we are proud to share that our heritage impact assessment and conservation management plan are going to be used as benchmark documents for assessing similar heritage projects in the future. So this forms that basis of the future conservation efforts. Okay. And with that, thank you.